to have some cold brew. Yum.
All right, everybody, we are back to Creativity is the Cure. Today I have my good friend, the one and only Becki Newton. How you doing, Becki?
I'm really good. I'm glad you're here.
So, creativity is the cure. What we try to do here is a lot of people think that creativity is only when you're drawing or singing or acting, things like that. You do a lot of those. I personally believe that people use creativity to solve problems in their life. People have heard that creativity and creative people just only use the right side of their brain, but studies are starting to show that you really need the balance. You need the logical left side and the creative right side, and they actually work better and they're more creative when we use them together. Would you agree with that?
I think that makes a ton of sense. I immediately think of my acting life, and people think, oh, actors, you're so creative. But once you get on a set, your lines have been decided for you. You're told where to stand, what to wear. Blocking.
Right.
So really, all of those creative decisions that perhaps made you an actor to begin with, they're slowly taken away, and you have to use that other side of your brain. You have to hit your mark, remember your lines. So it really is a marriage of those two things.
Right, and I've heard that a lot of professional actors, you learn your lines and then you just kind of throw it out because you need to get into the emotions and all the physical parts of the acting and being on the set, like you just said, right?
Yeah, so it's all the technical stuff, and then you have to act like you haven't planned any of it out and embrace all of the creative aspects of yourself. So it's a constant marriage of those two things. And when it gets too technical, I just have to take a deep breath and stop thinking about where I'm supposed to be standing, how I'm supposed to be standing, how I'm supposed to be speaking, and just go.
Right. I actually heard an interview with Anthony Hopkins once, and they were asking him about a performance he did in a Stephen King movie. I think it was Hearts in Atlantis. And there's one intense scene, and they go, "What were you thinking about?" And he said, "Absolutely nothing."
Wow. Well, yeah, you have to block it out, because sometimes they'll say, a wardrobe person will run in the middle of a really creative moment. A wardrobe person will come up and say, "Oh, if you stand like this, it doesn't look as good if you stand like this."
Right.
And suddenly your vanity starts to creep in, and how do I look? And all of those feelings start to creep in, and you just have to shut that out and go back to the creative all the time.
Kind of let go a little bit, right?
All the time, yes.
All right, before we go way back into your childhood and hear about creativity, you and I have something in common. Last year, I got to go to a wedding for my nephew in New Haven, Connecticut.
That's unbelievable.
Isn't
You
that
texted
weird,
me pictures from where I grew up. I said, "Why are you in Guilford?" So I was born in Guilford, right near New Haven. And I saw a picture of you. Weren't you at the place, or were you at the wharf in Madison?
No, the funny thing is, you're like, make sure you go to this restaurant. And
yes.
What was it?
It was the place. And it's in Guilford, Connecticut, where you basically bring all your own food and sit on stumps outside, but they cook the meat.
Yeah.
And it's when you describe it, by the way, I'm even hearing that going, why would anyone on earth go to a restaurant where you have to bring your own food? It's one of the coolest experiences. You've been to Connecticut more recently than I have.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been back in 4 or 5 years.
Right. Really beautiful, serene.
It's beautiful. It's small, beautiful, cozy, really far away from here.
What was it like to grow up there with the environment compared to where we are right now in Los Angeles?
I can't even think of anything that overlaps about it. There were seasons. It was small.
Seasons, right?
There were seasons, right? It was so small. A big difference for me is my family was there. I had both grandparents. My grandmother was a violin teacher in Guilford, and my other grandma, Martha, was a nurse that worked at adult daycare centers her whole life. So she took care of elderly people who could no longer be at home all day by themselves. So I was just surrounded by all different types of professions within my family, and in a town that really did embrace the arts. I really loved the theater community.
Yeah, let me ask quickly about that. What type of arts were there?
Mostly the theater program. In Guilford, Connecticut, when I grew up, it was everything. It was, I remember, I have chills even thinking about it. My brother, Matt, who's 1 year older than I am, and he's an actor and an acting coach. He runs an acting school in New York. And I remember going to see him in Oliver. The high school was doing a production of Oliver. And he was playing the Artful Dodger. He was this little freshman, shorter than I was at that point. And he just was so incredible within this amazing theater program. And I just knew I had to be part of that. In Guilford, theater was very disciplined. You didn't miss a rehearsal because you had to practice for something else. If you were in a show, didn't matter how old you were, you did not miss anything. And there was such a discipline to it. that
so
was
again,
really,
that's talking about the right and left brain, learning that balance.
Right. So you didn't get to sort of dabble in a play. You did the play. If there was a Christmas show and you signed up for it, you would get kicked out if you missed a practice.
1,000%.
And that changed a lot as I got older. I know we're kind of bobbing and weaving here. I remember I went to Penn to study history, and I thought, I'm going to do one of the plays. And I did a show there. And I remember people just wouldn't come because they had a test the next day, or they had something else to do. And I was so confused, as I didn't understand, like, what do you mean
That's not the way you grew up, right?
It's just not the way it works for me. So there's always been this real feeling of discipline mixed with this art. It's great to be artsy and have all these dreams, but there's such a discipline, especially when you're
practicality, right?
When you're working with other people. So I'm grateful that I have both of those things.
And still carry that with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go way, way back. What is your first creative memory?
I remember in kindergarten, Mrs. Fusco was my teacher, and I remember I have a snapshot in my brain of a butterfly drawing, and the assignment was draw a butterfly. And I remember I didn't just draw a butterfly. I added every color of the rainbow, and I just kept going and going, drawing this butterfly. And I distinctly remember her saying, "Wow, that's a beautiful butterfly. You might be an artist one day."
Right, and what effect did that have on you?
Everything. I just remember thinking, well, maybe. And what was amazing is I wasn't doing that butterfly for approval. I was just lost in that butterfly.
Right, and that's an important aspect.
A big one, because I do think creativity, especially as a profession, can become about approval.
Right.
What does that person think of me? Do they think I'm talented? Is this butterfly beautiful? I wasn't thinking about anything other than all the colors and all the shapes. And when she acknowledged what I had done, I kind of woke up and thought, oh, maybe this is beautiful.
Right.
I wasn't thinking about that. I was just busy. So I have a very distinct memory of Mrs. Fusco.
And would you say that gave you confidence in that part of yourself?
Maybe. It just lit something. I remember the feeling when something lights up and you do something your way and you don't really know why. And then you realize it might work, whatever that means. Yeah. It's like, that's really exciting.
All right, so the creative part of yourself that you recognize now, do you think that you got that from your parents at all, genetically, or maybe just the environment? When you think about who you've become now, do you see any aspects of yourself in your parents?
That's a great question. My mom went to art school. So I always say, like, oh, my brother and I became actors, but there's no arts in our family. It's not true. My mom went to art school, and at one point, my dad ran her gallery. When I was in college, they had a gallery in Branford, Connecticut, displaying all her artwork. My grandmother was a violin teacher. My brother was an actor. We just knew we loved acting.
Yeah.
I loved singing. I played the violin. I do remember feeling like, while I loved music, there was something about having to read the music and play it exactly the same way all the time that I found slightly boring.
Right.
So the lack of improvisation in the world of like orchestral music, I remember feeling a little bit bored. Right. So I've always gravitated toward things that let me put a little bit more of my own stamp on
Coloring
something.
outside of the lines.
Coloring
too.
outside of the lines, yeah.
Right.
I think my father, God rest his soul, was a poet on the inside, and I don't know if this was generational or just circumstantial. I think he wanted to be an artist, but grew up in a world where his parents were doctors and everyone went to college. And so I think the thing my parents did so well is they didn't tell us either way what we should or should not do or want to be.
And rare.
Very rare. And I think, my brother and I are products of that. There wasn't a formula other than just keep searching.
Yeah, and why did you think your dad was a poet on the inside? Can you give us an example that made you think that way?
I'm looking back. When I look back at our conversations and the way he spoke and the way he loved my mother's artwork and the way he supported the arts and loved the arts, that I think I'm just aware of the fact that I have had so many more opportunities to express myself so freely without rules, without expectation.
Do you think that the creative part of ourselves that we're talking about, can that help people with depression or anxiety or any kind of mental struggle that they're stuck in? Yeah,
I think I would say that creativity is the answer when you're looking for a way out of any struggle. Because as you mentioned before, it's problem solving, right? If I'm stuck and I think, oh, I'm so stuck, what am I going to do? That's one way to go. Or the other way is, gosh, what could I do to unlock? What can I unlock in myself? And I think I've seen with children, I have 4 children, when they're stuck in a moment.
We saw one this morning.
Oh, you did. The creative process of getting my 4-year-old out the door. That creativity, if you use it as a sort of tool to overcome something, it's a positive way to unlock, right? And to me, even the word creativity implies there's not one way. There isn't, I think,
there's many ways, yeah.
In my struggles in life, I always think, I'm not doing this right, whatever this is. But when I think of something creatively, it makes me think there are many answers. And that's comforting when you're facing a problem. You look around and you go, well, why is no one else having this problem? Instead of you say, well, what's my way around this?
And that's, I think, why I started this podcast, because I was going through some struggles within the last couple of years. And when I started to solve them, I go, wait a minute, this is the same part of my brain that when I play music and I improvise with, I go, that's what just saved me from the situation. In fact, you helped me too as a teacher, since we've known each other. Without mentioning any specific things, there was definitely some challenges, and you did the same thing. You said, well, what if you did this?
There's always another way.
Think outside the box, yeah.
There's always another way. And sometimes it's really hard to see what that is, but creativity allows us to say, well, there might be another way, and there's no one right answer to anything.
Totally agree. Now, let's flip it around. Do you and Chris, have you seen aspects of your creative personalities appear in your 4 children?
100%. And it's interesting, our 4 children are growing up with 2 actors as parents.
Right.
Already that's so different. Chris and I grew up, Chris is from a Greek family.
Yeah.
Immigrants, they moved to Toronto. Parents had no connection to showbiz, and he's become this very successful actor. He's the voice of Mickey Mouse. Like, he's incredible. My parents, while creative, as we've talked about, there was no connection to showbiz or anything like that. So suddenly, Chris and I are raising 4 children in Los Angeles.
And no rule book for you guys.
Right, there's no rule book for this. And I would say our creativity is obvious in our profession, but it's really become something essential to our daily life. Like, even feeding 4 children. That's like... It's like
I've been there.
It's like a meal.
3-ring circus.
It's a 3-ring circus 3 times a day. It's like having a dinner party, but nobody eats the same thing and nobody likes your food 3 times a day. So I think creativity and humor, which often go hand in hand for us, where it's like, how do we just get through a day, and how do we get through a month? And if we always go back to creativity, it helps get out of those moments where you're a little stuck.
Now, you guys have told me this story, but I want to share with the listeners. What did you and Chris do to solve your family issues during the pandemic?
Oh, this is great.
If I remember correctly, you were in New York, and then during the pandemic, you decided to move to Los Angeles.
Well, this will help our listeners know how we know each other so well. So we were in New York City, loving New York life. Chris and I met in New York. We've always loved New York. And we had just had our 3rd child, Hope. It was like living in the hallway of our apartment in a crib. Again, in New York, you don't have a lot of space. And it was March of, I guess that would have been 2020.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And the pandemic happened. Yeah. And we were suddenly in a small space in New York with 3 kids. We'd always been aware that we would come back to LA.
Right.
As 2 actors, there's a limit to how much can happen in New York and how much space there is in New York to live with 3 children at the time. And Chris looked at me and said, we're going back to LA. And I said, oh God, how? I mean, and I was thinking about school. I was thinking about everything. I'll fast forward. We moved out to LA with the kids. We homeschooled them for a while, which, talk about creativity. Yeah. Have you ever tried to figure out what a 7-year-old is supposed to be learning? And then you sort of go, well, why do they have to learn that? I found great power in the homeschooling experience because it made me, instead of just acquiescing to what kids learn, when my kids now come home from school and they have a book that's assigned to them, I don't really ask why that book. I just go, okay, you should probably read whatever chapters your teachers told you. When I homeschooled them, I was suddenly tasked with, why are they learning this? And is there a better option? And
that's a great question.
Do they have to learn half of this?
A lot of people don't ask that.
No, and you don't get the chance to. So it was like, well, why do they have to learn the weather patterns today? Couldn't we just go read a book? So that was this amazing chance for me to say, well, what do they need to be learning and why? And
did you find yourself customizing to each child? Because I know your kids well, and
they're very different.
They all learn very differently.
Yeah, and Rex and Daphne at this point. So Hope was a baby, so she didn't need to be in school. I just carried her around. Rex and Daphne was teaching them at the same time. They're 3 years apart.
Yeah.
Rex was really excited to be homeschooled because he didn't have to actually go to school. And Daphne really wanted to learn everything.
Yeah.
So I taught them together. Had its challenges, but was also kind of amazing. But one thing I was desperately missing was music education. To me, I don't care if you know the planets or a certain thing, but I was like, but how do we not have instruments in our house?
Right,
like for me, as a granddaughter of a violin teacher, I grew up in public school where you started, music was essential. It was, you had it, everyone picked up an instrument. There was no discussion. It was just which
You're right.
instrument.
It was you and I are pretty close in age, and it was very different back then.
Yeah, so I was like, that felt very absent to me. So in the fall of that year, the kids had started at Larchmont Charter where you and I met. And I remember I was going through the carpool lane. I said, I'm looking for a drum teacher to come to my house. Do you know anybody? And you raised your hand. Yeah, and you said, I'm a drum teacher. And then you started coming to our house and you met with Daphne.
Right.
And started teaching Daphne drums. And instantly I was like, I don't care what else she learns. Now this is what we've been missing. And then, of course, Rex would start wandering down there. What are you guys banging on? Oh, I want to do this, or let's try this. And somehow within a few months, there was a band of children at our house once a week.
You're like, let's build a studio. And then we had drum circles, bands.
And this idea of people are always looking for chances to be creative.
Yeah.
But the other side of the brain in this world is how do you arrange it? How do you get everyone at the same time? I mean, our text threads of like, which Wednesday? When can we do this? I think sometimes you have to sort of have the creativity, and then this other brain has to go, but how are we going to do it?
And the schedules and the parents.
And finally, we're like, hey, it's Wednesday at 5. Show up or not. But it became this, it's like, if you build it, it will come. Like, it was this old drum set in this empty room. And then, a year later, these fourth graders are playing completely on their own.
And
incredible music, performing.
Public. And at a very young age. I've worked with a lot of kid bands, but these guys.
They were young. And they loved it. And more than that, you could sense that they felt ownership of something right away. It's like, at that young age, this is my band. This is what we do. They would run down there, wait for you to come, wait for each other to come. And it's amazing.
We let them pick the songs. I'll never forget. Like, we want to do
Black Sabbath.
We want to do Black Sabbath and Taylor Swift. I was like,
okay. That was a really neat experience and one that I value incredibly. As sort of now they've moved to different schools and different places. I'm always looking for something special about the creativity as opposed to this kind of predictable or uniform, like something that's a little special, that where they can really follow the spark of what inspires them.
Yeah. I know you from 3 basic shows, your acting work, Ugly Betty, How I Met Your Mother, and now Lincoln Lawyer. My question to you is, which show allowed or allows you the most improvisation? I mean, I know a lot of shows you have to stick right to the script, and there's a good reason why, because it wouldn't work. Yeah. But are any of those shows, did they let you take another take and just kind of wing it and just see what happened?
For sure. Ugly Betty was, I mean, we barely stuck to the script. When my friend Michael Urie, you've met Michael Urie, the goddaughter of Dorothy. Yeah, I know you've met him. When we would get together, every now and then they would say, cut, can you guys just say what's on the page? That was a comedy. But
they used a lot of the improv.
A lot of it. And a lot of it was sort of physical improvisation. Like, I fell over a lot for no reason.
I actually want to ask you about, I don't know what episode, but I was watching an episode the other day, and you were the evil secretary, right?
Yes.
And so
always evil.
And then there was a guy that was at the front desk with you.
Yes.
And so a handsome guy comes up to the desk, and you both start hitting on him.
Right.
And then he turns around because he's shocked, but you guys then come up behind him like snakes.
Yes.
The physical comedy was astounding. Was that planned out and blocked?
Michael and I, so the gift of Ugly Betty was that Michael and I, it was both of our first jobs. I was right out of college. I didn't even know I wanted to be an actress. I mean, I wanted to be, but I certainly didn't think in a million years that I'd be on a hit show and at the Golden Globes. Yeah. Like I was just hoping to get a TV commercial. And I lucked out with that show.
Yeah.
And Michael and I, he was the greatest gift because we both get the giggles, and we're both goofy and silly, but we also love what we do. It's not that we don't respect it. It's just that together. It's like, did you ever have a classmate in elementary school that they had to separate you because you laughed so much?
Or sitting in church with my sister when I was little.
Yep, that was Michael and I. Anytime they said action, we're like, oh no. And we were able to play, and it was a really supportive environment. I think right away, people recognized that there was some magic there, and it was just when you watch two people having a great time, it's very hard not to smile. So Michael and I really embraced that, and the show was amazing about it. You know, a show like Lincoln Lawyer, you can't really improvise legal speak.
Right.
Half the time, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm saying. It's so complicated, and it's also it's different. It's so technical. So that's been an amazing creative challenge for me to go, how do I keep my stamp on this part while saying these words that are so technical?
So if you have to do that, can you at least, with your blocking or lack of blocking or physical expression, does it give you a little room?
I think that's...
Because I've noticed on the room, a lot of the subtle glances you do really make it work.
That's, I think, part of maturing creatively. To be in this Ugly Betty position where you can play and do whatever you want and everyone's laughing, that's wonderful. But a real challenge is to go, here is a legal monologue. Go make that interesting. That, for me, it's been incredible because it's a smaller, it seems like a smaller task, but to put your energy into a smaller space. Like if someone were to give you the drums and say, go crazy, and you probably could do that pretty easily, but if someone said, like, here's a small, quiet beat, make that interesting, that's been this amazing challenge. I had no idea how fulfilled I would be doing a drama with legal. I would have said not in a million years. That girl in Ugly Betty would not be standing in a courtroom addressing a judge and it not being a joke. It's like, so I've been so rewarded by that experience in a way that I could not have predicted.
Do you think there's a relationship to this? I've noticed as a drummer and as a musician, as I've gotten older, and I think this is typical for musicians and maybe actors too, that you learn to impress people with playing more simply or acting. Like you get to the crux of what's really necessary. And it also makes me think of my favorite author, Anne Rice, who wrote all the vampire stuff. Her last couple books were very short, but they were so dense and compact, and they got right to the heart of it, just like her books that were 1,000 pages. Mm-hmm. So are you finding that as you get older that you can get to what you need?
I think that's
a
more
confidence subtle level
thing. I think, and my husband, he'd be the first to admit, when we get to play and show all the things we can do, that's amazing. But I think when I watch TV or I watch a movie, I find I'm moved by the confident, quiet performances in a way that I might not have noticed when I was so busy looking for flashy, funny, pratfalls, all of it. And I think it takes a lot of confidence to do very little. And the people who do that well, it's so powerful.
A couple nights ago, I saw my good friend Steve Gadd. He's a really famous drummer that plays with James Taylor and all these people. And he can play flashy, but the best part of the show was he was playing a simple beat and everyone could not help but clap along. And I was like, what is that magic?
Yeah, it's magic.
Sounds like that's what you and Chris appreciate.
We are, you have to allow for it though, because in creativity and in showbiz, you're always trying to impress people.
Right.
And you learn during auditions, you think, what can I do to stand out?
Yeah.
So you're going in there and doing all of the accents, put on the crazy outfit.
Right.
It takes a lot more confidence to walk in and be quiet and simple. And I think that takes experience. It takes confidence, knowledge of oneself. And that can take, for me, it's taken a very long time to find that. I think I'm getting closer. I think I'm just too tired for all the bells and whistles now. But also a confidence in what I have achieved and different ways of exploring the creativity. Right.
Now, a really fun question. I know you as an animal lover.
Yes.
You are like the female Dr. Dolittle. I don't know how you do it. You've got Zeus, which I think you got in a regular way, right?
Zeus we got Zeus? From a breeder. But it's not regular because it was during the pandemic. So Zeus is our golden retriever. He's 4, but you would still think he's 3 months old based on his
behavior,
aptitude and behavior. And when we moved out from New York, we promised the kids animals.
Right.
Now, I've been married a long time. I married a Greek man who never had an animal in his life. And when we got together and got engaged, we're talking 20-something years ago, I said, but we're going to get a dog, right? He goes, yeah, someday.
Right.
So for 20 years, I said, Chris, We have to get a dog. We have to get a dog. So when the pandemic happened and the world was ending, I said, are we going to get a dog now? And he goes, yeah, fine. So part of what helped us bribe the kids of like, we're moving. It's going to be so exciting. We're going to get a dog. Well, what I didn't know was that nobody could get a dog in California during the pandemic. And I knew we had a baby. Yeah. And I grew up with a golden retriever.
Yeah.
I could climb on that golden retriever. I could sleep with that golden retriever. Yeah. My mom heart and the me that grew up with a golden retriever sleeping in my bed with me was like, we need a golden retriever.
Yeah. They mean because they're calm disposition.
They're calm. I just wasn't worried about, of course I would want to rescue. However, with a baby, there was just for me a lot of concerns because I don't know their history. So I find a golden retriever breeder and I call them. I say, okay, so I'm ready to get a puppy. And they said, great, there's a waiting list. I said, oh, okay. And they said, you have to make a deposit. I said, okay. They said, well, the mother dog isn't even pregnant yet. So you're essentially putting a deposit on a future embryo that doesn't exist yet.
Hypothetical dog.
A hypothetical dog. I said, so what if the dog doesn't get pregnant? And they said, well, it will at some point. So imagine me turning to my husband later that day, say, listen, I put a deposit down for a lot of money. He goes, sure, when does the dog come? I said, I don't know. Doesn't exist yet. He said, this sounds like a scam. I said, and it's not a scam. I mean, even though I thought maybe it is a scam.
Right.
And then maybe a year later, we get a call. Okay, at this point, it was like really rainy in LA. Everyone on earth had COVID. I'm pretty sure we were doing a renovation. And we get a call. Hey, there's a puppy here. And if you don't take this puppy, you'll be put at the end of the next waiting list and wait another year. Yeah. Meanwhile, they've had my money. We're talking like a couple $1,000s at this point.
Right.
And I was like, we have to take this dog. And Zeus, he's just a tornado. He's just like, he showed up and he's this crazy big ball of fluff. And my husband, I promised my husband, I said, dogs are so low maintenance. All you have to do is walk it for miles and miles. And Chris loves walking. He goes, okay, I can do that. And what I didn't remember, because when you're a child with a puppy, you don't realize your parents do all the work, was that they're not even allowed to go for walks for like 6 months.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Because of shots and all,
Wow.
So basically, we just had to be inside with this insane puppy that would chew on everything, break everything. And we had a baby at that point. Hope was a toddler. It was a pretty disastrous time to get a puppy. And I had sold it to Chris, like, it'll just be great. Everyone will just sit with this dog. So it was a big learning curve. Now we love Zeus. We always loved him, but now Zeus is just part of the family. Yeah. My kids literally step on his head and use it as a ladder. And he's like, thank you. So he's amazing. Then we decided to start rescuing cats. And by we, I mean me.
They come to you, let's be honest. They just show up at your doorstep.
The cats show up at my door.
Buttercup.
Yes. So we had one rescue cat named Milo. I started pouring the rescue cat ads because at this point I was like, well, we can't pay more money for another animal that we're not going to get for a year. Let me find some cats that need a home.
Right.
So I go on, what are those? Pet Finder.
Right.
Found this. And I look for like the older cats that look like maybe
nobody would take them.
So I found the weirdest, oldest cat in the world, this cat called Milo that used to live here. I don't know if you remember. And Milo was a cat where you had to know him to love him. Everyone's like, oh, is that a cat? I said, he's really cool once you get to know him. And he was at the end of his life. We only had him for about 6 months before he had some liver issues, poor little guy.
Yeah.
And then we also got Buttercup. Now, Buttercup is a rescue cat.
And love. You know and
love. Everyone loves Buttercup. So I said to my husband, again, this is like a theme. I said, okay, no, this cat's going to take no work. It's a rescue. It's house trained. It's fine. And Buttercup was cute, but when she walked by us, we were like, what's that smell? I mean, it smelled like a horrible,
I remember
rotten, disgusting, skunky smell. We're like, what? I don't know what that is. I take Buttercup to the vet. It turns out all her teeth are rotten.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'd promised Chris, no maintenance, no money, easy rescue cat.
Right.
And I go to the cat dentist, or the vet, I guess you would call it. And they say, so Buttercup can live a really great life with no teeth. I instantly start laughing because if you can't laugh at that, a cat with no teeth, great life, she'll be able to eat. We're going to keep 2 of the fangs just for looks in the front, because Buttercup, her looks are important. And that'll cost $2,000.
Oh.
I go home to my husband. I was like, so I have a great fix. We're going to remove all the cat's teeth. Right. He's like, oh, that's cool. Does it cost anything? I was like, $2,000. And he goes, what? So my hair-brained animal.
Just Invisalign.
Exactly. At this point, we'd already paid for Daphne's braces. So yeah, Buttercup, the cat with no teeth. No, sorry, 2 snaggle teeth just for looks. I love her. Like this cat,
she's
everyone
awesome.
loves Buttercup.
Even when we're playing music, she'd come in and sit with us. She
lays around. She's like a little, and then lastly, very recently, we've adopted a giant tortoise.
That is true. Now that
Wordle.
one caught me off guard. Even knowing you in the video of Zeus with the tortoise.
Yeah, so again, part of my creativity, animals. I love them. They're unpredictable. They're funny. How funny are animals, right? You take a picture of them, you'll probably smile. They're cute.
Right.
So I remember one day I was looking outside and I remembered a friend of mine in Pasadena who I'd visited one day, and she had this enormous tortoise wandering around her yard. And in a moment I was like, God, we should have a tortoise wandering our yard. So I text my friend in Pasadena. I say, hey, what kind of tortoise was that?
Right.
Because I've been thinking about getting one. And also Daphne, where she goes to school, the teacher had a tortoise in the classroom. And I've just like...
Oh, that's right.
There's sort of tortoise vibes everywhere.
Yeah.
And she said, well, incidentally, we're moving and this tortoise needs a home. And so, of course, I say, bring him over. 2 days later, my friend pulls this enormous tortoise out of her trunk. And now we have Wordle, the turtle tortoise. Daphne calls him Wordle the turtle, the tortoise, because he's actually a tortoise, but Wordle rhymes with turtle.
Almost sounds like a Dr. Seuss line.
Exactly. So this little funny farm keeps growing.
So I imagine, because I know Chris travels a lot for work, every time he comes home, there's probably a new animal, but I've got to ask about my favorite story. Is it true that one time you guys noticed there was a lion on your roof?
Okay, this is a good one. A lot of people know about P22.
Yeah.
P22 was a famous mountain lion that wandered Los Angeles, particularly Los Feliz. Now, I don't know the exact history, but at some point it crossed the 405, and it was this sort of legend because it would just appear.
It was on TV. Yeah.
It was on TV, and it had a following. I think P22 had a Twitter following. True. This was an animal people have been following for years, lots of sightings in Griffith Park. And after Chris and I, a few months we lived here, Chris is a bit of a nervous sleeper. So anytime he hears a noise outside, he like wakes up. What was that noise? And one night he goes, what was that noise? I said, oh, Chris, go to bed. It was just Zeus. And he goes, no, I heard something. I said, no, you didn't. He opens the curtains. We look outside and we're staring directly at a mountain lion on our little balcony. But probably 5 feet away.
Just so people know, the house you live in kind of has different levels.
Right. So we're in our bedroom. There's like a little terrace off our bedroom, a little balcony, and we were facing this mountain lion. Now, of course, this was one of those moments where you truly don't believe your own eyes. Right. And it's hard to find moments like that where you think, I can't be seeing
a little bit of the dilated pupils happening for you guys.
And Chris also wears glasses, so he can't really see, unless he has his contacts in. So he's looking,
going back to bed.
He goes, what is that? And I go, I think it's a cat. But I noticed it had something sparkly on its ear. Oh. And I went, why is it wearing an earring? Turns out P22 had a tracker, like a little tracker device on its ear. But we really stood there for 5 minutes going, what? We didn't believe the very thing we were...
process it.
Cannot. And then I finally went, oh, do you remember our friend told you about that lion? And he goes, oh my God. And we didn't know what to do. So I said, call animal control. You know the people you call if there's like a rabid raccoon on your roof? So we call animal control. Hi, oh my God, there's a mountain lion on the roof. And they go, oh yeah, that's P22.
We've been looking for him.
Chris goes, who the fuck is P22? Like, what is this? So everyone was happy for us, but we still didn't know what to do about this damn lion on our roof. And then we watched it for a while. And at that point, again, small children, you go right to like, this lion is going to eat all my animals. And then for a few days, we were pretty shaken. You know, the lion went away, we thought. In my head, it was like sleeping somewhere on our property, but it went away. And then a few days later, I made a choice. I thought, well, yes, this lion has existed, but I don't think I'm special enough to be the first person that this lion eats.
Right.
Like, so I finally decided if it hasn't eaten anyone, it's not going to eat me. So I let it go and looked at it as like an amazing blessing, right? If this lion wanted to come to my house and I locked eyes with P22, that's pretty cool. Not a lot of people can say that a lion visited their roof.
Right, almost like a spirit animal.
That's what I thought. Chris was still like, I'm moving back to New York right now. Forget all these animals.
With all this talk about animals, I've got to ask, what is it like working with Winston on the set? What are the challenges? What are the fun things about working with an animal on the set? And do you think they're also creative?
Oh, okay.
And just so everybody knows, if you haven't watched Lincoln
Lawyer, my character Lorna has a pug named Winston. Now, here's a cool little tidbit. Ted Humphrey, dear friend of mine, creator of Lincoln Lawyer, he loves pugs and has 2 in real life. So when he was creating the show, was like, I want Lorna to have a pug.
Absolutely.
The gift of having a pug in your arms is no matter what you're doing acting-wise, people are smiling. So if I'm in a scene holding a dog, it almost doesn't matter what I'm doing because it's already good. So there are challenges, though, with a pug because as I'm doing my scene, you have an animal trainer behind the camera waving some disgusting food. So the dog
for eye contact. Yeah.
So you have to focus 5,000 times more because there's all these people going like, over here, to the dog. And I get distracted very easily. So I have to be super focused.
Oh, a lot of distractions. I never thought of that.
Because they have to wave all these things near the camera.
Right.
And when I'm having a conversation with you and there's all these things happening around you, but no one else can see that, you have to really stay laser focused. So yeah, that's one of those moments where I trust that dog's presence in the scene will help it, even though filming it can get really technical. Like, if I have a great take, but the dog was looking in the wrong direction, we have to redo it. So the best take is often the one where the dog is looking in the right direction.
Right, and
so you have to
after a while, the dog got to know you, and it was probably easier, right? Or not really?
Not really. I wouldn't call this dog.
So what you're saying is like some actors, you're not friends outside of work.
But the other thing is, you see how much I love animals. Every time I see the dog off camera, I run up to it, I want to hug it, and they don't want me to do that because the dog is at work when it's on screen. So imagine me trying not to hug a pug and attack it.
All right, here's a couple of fun questions. What character was the most different from your real personality that you've played in anything?
Well, I have one in mind, but it wasn't very good. I did a show that not a lot of people saw. It was called Tell Me a Story.
Right.
And I had to play like a happy hostess at a hotel who turns out to be an evil witch and like kills people in the basement. That, I can't say that I've ever played like evil in the really dramatic way. I do like funny evil pretty well. I do sort of idiotic really well.
Like Ugly Betty.
Yeah.
It's over the top, but it's
hilarious.
Over
the top, it's hilarious, but I don't know that I'm an effective like serial killer. Like I don't know. I don't think I have those acting chops.
We shall see.
So I would say that was an attempt for me that I'm not sure I really nailed at playing sort of a darker character. It was supposed to have a flip side. I think I gravitate more towards sunny and slightly idiotic. Lorna on Lincoln Lawyer is probably closest to me, I think, in that she's super kind of academic in some ways, but kind of goofy in other ways. So a lot of that, I think, is what I've been able to bring to this part that already was great on the page. She's very bright. Like a lot of the wardrobe part, they were great about letting me weigh in on. I thought when I got this part, I'd been at the pandemic. I had been a stay-at-home mom. I was like, please don't put me in anything comfortable. I want to wear bright heels. I want to wear bright suits. I want Lorna to.
Helps, right?
I love it. So again, it's like with a pug and a beautiful outfit. You walk in and people are smiling, and that's such a great element on that show. That's illegal. We're in a courtroom. Everyone's in their dark suits, and I get to skip in, sometimes holding a dog with these great lines and this great energy.
Totally
it's
pops.
Really fun. I love it. I love it.
When I was doing research for this interview, I've seen a lot of your stuff, but two of my favorite things were when you were on Craig Ferguson.
Yeah.
And when one of the times you went to see Kelly Ripa. Now, the reason why I bring these two up is I'm curious, do you like to do pranks? Because I've got to say, on the Craig Ferguson one, he said he liked the little mini hamburgers and you had someone bring them out, a chef. And then with Kelly Ripa, you showed up with exactly the same clothes.
Yes. So
Tell us a little bit about those.
I used to find, so I did for a long time, like talk show appearances in the past, I won't say anymore, were strange at first because especially when I was doing Amanda, that character was so different for me. Amanda, again, I was like early 20s.
Yeah.
That show was so fashiony and so heightened that sometimes I didn't feel as confident being in person because I thought, they're going to expect me to be funny and fabulous and kind of bitchy. And I'm kind of just, I'd like to think like a normal person and not, when you don't have 2 hours of hair and makeup, you just look like a human versus someone on TV.
God forbid. Right.
God forbid. So I remember I would always find those appearances very intimidating. As I've gotten older, they're fun. Like when this Kelly.
That one was pretty recent, right?
That was recent. Yeah. And I remember when they asked me to do the show, I said, okay, please help me figure out what Kelly's wearing that day. And I want to act like it's an accident.
So that was your idea.
I remember like, And they don't know. I mean, Kelly doesn't have her outfits planned out months in advance, but I was like, I do think I have to go out there dressed as Kelly, because so many times when I go on the show.
And she didn't know.
She had no idea.
Oh, God.
Or maybe they told her I don't know. Either way, it was like, I think I've learned a lot more to just sort of have confidence in me, the human, and not have to put on some show as an actress or think people expect something in particular. It's like, here I am, and isn't this fun that I've gotten to do this for so long?
And do you remember about the Craig Ferguson? How did that? Because you had a chef come out with one of his favorite foods.
So a lot of those shows, like we sort of pre-plan. You do a pre-interview. You talk about what would be funny.
Yeah, I have heard that. That's true.
And a lot of times it's because it can get. I mean, we're friends, and we've spoken for hours and hours in real life. When you're talking to a complete stranger in front of an audience, and it goes wrong, it can go real wrong. So that's why a lot of times they'll do a pre-interview just to talk about your interests. There are some people that don't want to talk about certain things. So it's like you always want to become clear about what you might talk about and what you definitely don't want to talk about.
Right. I always like to end with a few quotes and just have your response. Now, you've told me that you were a fan of Judy Garland, correct?
Yes.
She once said this: always be a first-rate version of yourself instead of a second-rate version of someone else.
Oh, I have chills. Well, and also Judy Garland, my fourth child, is named Dorothy. So clearly I love Wizard of Oz, all things.
I didn't realize it came from that.
Oh, yeah, part of it, yeah. So one thing a lot of people don't know, my first big job in LA, I was fired. So I had been doing commercials before Ugly Betty, the year before. I had been doing, I got a pilot, and it was for this show called The Loop. And I remember I auditioned, didn't really know kind of what I was doing, and then I got the job. And I didn't know why I got the job. So when I got to set, I looked around and said, what do you want me to do? How should I do this? I asked all these questions. Should I be more mad? Should I be less mad?
What's
all
my motivation?
All I did was ask everyone else. Back to that quote, second-rate version of, what is it? Second-rate version of someone else. I was looking for the me that they wanted.
Right.
And everyone went, and at this point, you're on a set. No one's thinking about it that much. They just kind of need you to do it. And I spent so much time trying to figure out what other people wanted of me, and that it didn't work. And I got a call a couple months later. So we've decided to replace you. You've been let go. And I was like, ugh. And I think deep down, I knew that I wasn't very good because I didn't know why I was there.
Right.
And the next year, I got an audition for Ugly Betty. They were looking for a 6-foot-tall supermodel. Old Becki would have said, I shouldn't even audition.
Right.
And then I went, I'm going to give them a version of someone who thinks they're a supermodel.
Yeah.
And I marched in there. I didn't ask any questions about what they were looking for, what they wanted. And I said, here's my Amanda. And I knew going into it that I was going to get it. And it was, this superpower was unlocked when I realized if I keep looking around for what people want from me, I'm never going to be the best me.
Yeah.
And I always try when I'm on a set, this is all collaboration. Creativity is all about collaboration. But if you don't know exactly why you're there, then you're just going to float around and you'll never be able to bring what's deep inside of only you. So I love collaborating. When I get notes from a director, I'll listen to them and always be open to them, but never to the point where it's not at all what I agree with. So it's like if a director comes to me with a note and it's not what I think, we'll have a conversation about it. I won't abandon what I was thinking and try something else. All of it's a collaboration, but just back to that quote, like you're in line with yourself. You can handle anything. You can be flexible. As a parent, as a human, as a friend. It's not about abandoning every part of you to accommodate other people. But it's also not about going like, here's what I think and not listening. It's both. And the greatest creative lesson I learned was getting fired from my first huge job. It was mortifying. It was embarrassing. It was every awful feeling. And I had two choices. I could either quit or I could say, let me figure out what makes me tick and offer that, as opposed to hope it randomly shows up in an audition.
Right. Yeah, I think we often learn a lot from failures.
Yes. And, and when people need approval. And people in showbiz, if anything we're trying to do is based on people saying yes to it, the danger there is you lose sight of what you think, right? You're like, well, here's what I get hired to do. If I don't keep saying silly or funny, no one will hire me. Okay, but then you're passive to what other people are thinking versus like, here's what I have to offer. And that could change tomorrow.
Right.
Like I forget what year it was, after we left LA, I went to New York and I had an audition for a show called Divorce with Sarah Jessica Parker, Thomas Hayden Church. It was dramatic. It was on HBO. There was nothing goofy about it. And I just was so focused at that point on moving to New York and Rex and Daphne and putting them in a school. And I went, yeah, okay, I'll do this. And all of this extra approval energy, I just didn't have it. So I walked in, I met Sarah Jessica Parker, an idol of mine.
Yeah.
And Thomas Hayden Church, and I did the scene, and it wasn't about, am I going to get it? Are they going to like me? I just said, here's my version. And I got it and had probably one of the most transformative creative experiences in my life, because it wasn't about being goofy or silly or running around in high heels.
Right.
It was a different me, and I loved it. And I didn't know I could do it. So that constant back to center, moving out the noise of people's approval, I think is really important with creativity. Yeah,
at your core, you had the first-rate version of yourself.
I did, at my core.
Now, another one of your heroes you told me about is Carol Burnett. She once said, you have to go through the falling down in order to learn to walk. Oh, we just talked about that. It helps to know that you can survive it. That's an education in itself. I think we kind of...
We did. And the idea, I have to remember sometimes, because I always like everything to be magical and amazing and wonderful.
Yeah.
We can all do hard things. Yeah. And some days are really fucking hard.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you're not living your best life.
Right.
I think we've been sold a bill of goods that for a couple months you're not feeling great, or you're a little sad, or you're a little down. All of that can be woven together as an incredible life. And it's really important. We can all handle hard things. Yeah. You've seen it with children. It's you can either give up when something's a little hard, or you can say, no, you can handle hard things.
Right.
That's been a great lesson I've learned later in life, because I used to think as sort of this mini overachiever, and I see it in my daughter, well, I want to be good at everything. Well, yeah, but you have to be bad at it first.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be bad, be okay with being bad to get good. And what a great lesson, right? We all, I think, as parents too, you think, well, let me put them in every single lesson, and it's like they're little robots. They're not. You can show them all of these things they can learn, and they'll spark to things. Some things they might not spark to, but they still could get pretty darn good at it. I remember with violin, because my grandma was a teacher, I had played since birth.
Right.
Literally, I don't remember putting a violin in my hand, but I'm sure she did when I was very young. So when I was in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, I was, quote, an incredible violinist. It was just that I had been playing for so long. I didn't really have to practice, because I already knew how to do all of it. I had vibrato. But I noticed something around 5th and 6th grade. The kids that weren't necessarily amazing were starting to catch up. And the reason is they were working hard.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to middle school and high school, I was no longer first chair, amazing, years ahead of everyone. Everyone was working hard. They were passing me, and they had a love for it that they chose.
Yeah,
because I didn't necessarily someone handed me a violin, and I just could do it.
Right.
So it's that thing of it doesn't matter when you start something. If you want to learn something, you just have to put in that hard work, and then maybe the magic dust is sprinkled in there. But I think it's important to remember that. You have to have the passion and the hard work, both of those things.
Right, the balance. All right, last one. I think about a year ago, you let me borrow a book that I'm realizing now I got to give back to you. It was called Quiet, The Power of Introverts
I love that
in a
book.
World That Can't Stop Talking, by Susan Cain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the book, she says, in a way, education by its nature favors the extrovert, because you are taking kids and putting them into a big classroom, which is automatically going to be a high stimulation environment. Probably the best way of teaching in general is one-on-one, but that's not something everyone can afford. Now, I've got to say, from the few years that I've known you, your kids have done a little bit of homeschool, they've done a little bit of charter school, and now private school.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that quote, thinking about your kids and how they've responded?
What I recommend that book to anyone.
So good. Even I'm an extrovert, and I loved it.
What stood out to me is from a young age, say you're at a play date at these schools when your kids are about to go to kindergarten. Let's get them all to the park and they can play together. And the parents are standing around super stressed out if the kids aren't all high-fiving and singing together right away. And the one that's over to the side by itself, everyone's kind of worried about. And this book explores the fact that why can't someone in a group setting go sit to the side if they don't feel like it? And we don't need to reward kids for being outgoing and boisterous if that's not organic to them. I think depending on the child, like, someone like Rex, my oldest, he does much better in a group because he's so good with people. And
I'm laughing because his energy. Whenever I see him, it's like 10 cups of coffee.
10 cups of coffee. But what that does is when Rex is in a group, people love him being there. Yeah. And he gets self-esteem from that kind of addition that he gives any room. Like his vibes are good.
It's like magnetic.
It's magnetic. So if he might not necessarily know every answer on a test, but they're doing a group assignment, everyone wants Rex to be the captain of sort of their whatever group, whatever it is like they have to do. Right. So he's someone who excels with that. And I work with him more one-on-one in some of the academic stuff where it requires a little focus. Daphne is great in groups and great individual. Everyone has a different style and where they excel. Yeah. I think this book is just so valuable. This idea, actors especially, often we're rewarded for being like the most you walk into a room and, well, not anymore because people don't have in-person auditions anymore, but it used to be that you could go pretty far. And I think I fell into this category doing commercial auditions for a long time of just being outgoing and being good at meeting people. Yeah. I don't necessarily have I don't have like a deep craft that I studied. I studied history and Spanish, but I could meet people really well. Yeah. And that was sort of my talent. Other people though can be incredible with their talent, but maybe with people, they are not as comfortable. So I think...
Are you kind of saying meet people at their point of need?
Yeah, or recognize that one's not more valuable. Education especially, but one's not more valuable than the other. And I think we're getting away from sort of the personality being the thing we reward. There's always going to be the most outgoing person, but that doesn't make the person that's not outgoing less valuable in a group. Adam Grant is another. I think I've given you some of his books where he talks about, he's a psychology professor at Wharton at Penn, I think psychology. He talks about sort of corporate psychology. And in one of his books, he talks about the hiring process. Yeah. And you don't necessarily want to hire the person that's like the most outgoing and crazy. You want to hire the person that might be slightly unpleasant and honest because they're gonna tell you the truth. Yeah. So I think that book, all these kinds of ways of thinking, it's like, what do we value in people? Yeah. Introvert, extrovert, there's a place for everybody, and the openness, especially for me when raising 4 very different kids, is like there's a beautiful place for every single person. You don't have to feel comfortable walking into a room of 100 people. That's okay.
You're making me think of it is when you and I grew up, I don't know how your school was, but it was really tough because if there was a special needs kid, they had to go on a separate bus, which they would call the short bus. I was an intelligent person, but a different learner. And a lot of my friends were in what they would call the gifted classes. And there were people trying to learn how to speak English. Everything was very segmented in upstate New York in the early 70s, early 80s. And one thing I love about teaching at a charter school like mine in Los Angeles is I've got people from all over the world. And in the same classroom, I've got 22 kids. Maybe one is academically advanced. Maybe one kid has Tourette syndrome. Maybe one kid doesn't know how to speak English. I think it's beautiful. It's very challenging for the teacher to think of a lesson that will get through to everybody. Yeah. But it's worth it, just like you said, because we're trying to help them find their, first-rate version of themselves. Yeah. It's challenging, but worth all the work, and it sounds like that's what you do with your family, too.
And the implication that, like, it doesn't have to look the same on anyone. Like, this person's first-rate version of themselves doesn't have to. Like, an A+ on this math test might be this person's first-rate version, but this person might get a C, but that's amazing because 2 weeks before they didn't know any of the concepts. Like, it really is about, like, recognizing what that first-rate version means, and it doesn't have to be compared on a graph exactly with everyone else.
And it goes the other way, too, because I feel the job of a teacher or a parent is to get them ready to go out into the real world and I think that's our biggest wish of all of us as teachers and parents, that they can become independent. So I think it's also important to give them boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
Like I might have a kid in my class who's got an extreme special needs issue, but I'm going to give him the same boundaries because I don't want him to grow up or her and go out into the world and just feel because they have this issue, like I had ADHD when I was younger, that gives them a license to just do whatever they want and not follow the rules. Mm-hmm. So would you agree with that we also need to give them boundaries?
I think boundaries are everything, and boundaries are equal, right? That's one thing. It's like, if we all get the same one, we can't complain about it. I think it's super important. And one thing you said about like going out into the world.
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of talk of how like testing and there's this focus on the grades. I'm less concerned about perfect grades and more concerned about, how are my kids with other people? Are they looking out for other people? Are they helping other people? Are they asking for help when they need it? Like, how do we work in groups? I think that's where, for me, the most optimism and hope when I think about the future for them is like, I want them to be around other people. I want them to contribute. I want them to be productive. And I want them to know how to ask for help. And none of that has to do with an A+ on a test. That's like, this is people stuff. That's why I think like camps are really important, like meeting new kids all the time. My kids are really good at meeting people because we've moved so much. Adaptability. These things can't necessarily be measured in a math test.
And when we all leave this mortal coil, right?
Yeah.
We can't take any of this stuff with us. We can't take money. We can't take belongings. And I think the only thing they can remember is, the love that we put out there,
the
and
energy,
the interaction, and what people remember about how we treated them.
Mm-hmm. And how many animals we have.
All right, I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you very much, Becki Newton.
You're
Let's
welcome.
do this again soon.
Anytime.
All right.
All right, bye-bye.